Welcome back to Chapter 7 of Principles of Accounting 2. So, Chapter 7 is where things kind of start to get interesting in this class because now we've really taken the background information that we've learned and we're able to apply it to start making decisions. Because we haven't spent a lot of time, right, understanding in the first 5 chapters, hey, what are different costs? How do I categorize them? How do they change based on the units that I produce? And things like that. Then in chapter 6, we were answering some questions on, hey, how does my profit change based on a couple of things? If I'm able to lower my fixed costs, if I increase my variable cost per unit, if I'm able to, maybe decrease my sales price, how does that change the units sold? Okay. So now we're taking kind of all of those ideas and we're going to start making incremental analysis for short-term decision making. Okay. So here are the steps in the decision-making process. I'm sure you guys have seen this before, but you have to identify the decision problem, determine the alternatives, evaluate the costs and benefits of each analysis or alternative, make the decisions, and then ultimately review the results of the decision. So a good example of something like this would be, hey, it's a personal decision. Do I want to rent, a new place? Because problem is, number one, I need to find a new place to live. Number two, I can rent a 1-bedroom apartment or I can share a 3-bedroom house. Now I'm going to go through and I'm going to look at the cost of each. If I rent, a 1-bedroom apartment, it's going to cost me $800, but I'm on the hook for all $150 of utilities. I don't split those, right? I have fuel and parking because I'm able to bike to campus, so I don't have to pay for fuel and parking for a total cost of $950. Or I can rent this house with my buddies, but they're kind of loud. They like to have parties. I don't know. I'm not going to be as studious if I do this. Okay. So I'm going to split that $1,800 rent 3 ways for $600. The utilities, $450 in utilities. That's crazy. But split 3 ways is $150. I'm on hook for. It's a little bit further from campus, so I have $75 in parking cost. So it looks like I'm going to save some money, right, if I go with option 2. So it really depends, right? Like I say all the time, quantitatively, you should choose option 2, right? It's cheaper. But does that also match up with your goals and agendas? Because like I said, unfortunately, your friends, they're party animals. And now all of a sudden you're going to be, exposed to parties. You're not going to get to study as much. And maybe that's not the best thing. Okay. But say you do determine that you're going to go ahead and rent that. Then step 5, at the end of the day, you review it and you ask yourself, hey, was this a good idea? Should I do it again? Businesses do the exact same thing. Okay. And so now we're getting into, I think, one of the last kind of groups of categories of costs that we introduced back in chapter 1, where we're looking at relevant versus irrelevant costs. So a relevant cost here has the potential to influence a specific decision and must be considered in the analysis. There's kind of a 2-part step or 2-part process that you have to step or cross, wording that poorly. But to be relevant, you have to occur in the future and you have to differ between alternatives. Okay. So it could be differential or incremental costs, same way as saying relevant. But again, you're going to probably see this on an exam. What makes a cost relevant? Occurs in the future, differs between alternatives. So the difference in monthly rent between the house and the apartment was $200. What would we call that? Well, we would call that a relevant cost. Or we could call it a differential cost, an incremental cost, whatever you prefer. So relevant cost can also be called avoidable cost. Why is that? Well, because you'd avoid this cost if you chose the different alternative. So think about it. Over in this slide deck, I avoid the rent of $800 and the utilities I avoid the rent of $800 right here. Okay. Because, hey, I don't have to pay it if I rent my 3-bedroom house. So the cost of fuel and on-campus parking could be avoided if you lived in the apartment. Okay. So that would be considered an avoidable cost. Okay. So then here we have an irrelevant cost. And irrelevant costs do not affect or influence or affect a decision. So if something has already been incurred, it's called a sunk cost, and you shouldn't use that cost that you've already spent to evaluate this new decision. Okay. I mean, it's kind of like one of those things. Say you decided to transfer to Nebraska Wesleyan, and you're like, hey, I'm trying to decide, do I want to transfer? Do I want to stay at this other school? I don't know. Say you went to school at, I don't know, like Concordia. The fact that you already paid tuition for a year in Concordia shouldn't impact your decision-making process on if you should transfer to Wesleyan, right? You should just compare the two tuitions. You should compare, your room and board, things like that, right? But again, the cost that you incurred for your freshman year at Concordia, well, that doesn't matter. Okay, that's sunk. It already occurred. It occurred in the past. Or, to be relevant, the future costs do not differ between all different alternatives. So this one's a little bit tricky, but here you can see that this utilities of 150, well, it's the same between whether I rent a one-bedroom apartment or whether I room with my buddies. So this is considered an irrelevant cost, right? So even though, right, it's because they end up being the same across the two options. Okay. So the next type of cost to talk about as well is going to be opportunity and capacity costs. So an opportunity cost, it's more of an economic concept. And up until this point, we really haven't quantified it, but it's the foregone benefit or lost opportunity of choosing one alternative over the other. So a lot of the time, it's not going to be relevant to us unless the capacity of a critical resource is limited. And capacity is the idea of the measure of the limit placed on a specific resource. So just like with Starbucks last week, or in our last chapter, they can only serve so many customers, right? Like they only have so many espresso machines, only so many people can go in and sit in a Starbucks. So they're limited in capacity. Okay. So again, number of people that can fit in a restaurant, number of employees who are able to serve clients, machine time available, etc. So you kind of have two options here. You either have idle or excess capacity, and that's saying I have more than enough resources to satisfy demand. Like I always have an espresso machine at Starbucks that is not being used. It sits idle because there's not so many customers needed that I need to, start up that espresso machine. Versus full capacity is, hey, at least one of my resource limits have been reached. So I cannot fit another employee in the Starbucks counter, or I use all of my espresso machines. That is reached. So if I choose to do one thing, it means giving up the opportunity to do something else. Okay. So when you're operating at full capacity, opportunity costs become relevant. All right. So next time, we're going to talk about 4 different incremental analysis decisions that we will make, which are special order, make or buy, keep or drop, and sell or process further. So I will see you then.